This is another episode of Curing Racism. I am your host, Paz Simpson, along with my co host, Mr. Paul Hoyt. We are coming together so that we can solve what we call racism, right? A place where we look at your commonly accepted beliefs that cause your behavioral reflexes, excuse me, biased behavioral reflexes that have been negatively affecting our world. So today, Paul, my brother, thank you for coming to another episode. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm about recovered from my Super Bowl weekend. I don't know if many of you know this, but I actually worked at the Super Bowl. I took a job at Levi's Stadium, which is only about a mile north of my house, about 7 months ago. So I've been working football games and concerts and soccer games and all of that just so I would get the opportunity to have the Super Bowl experience. And I did. So I worked all day Sunday for the Super Bowl and had a really, really great time.
I think you had a unique experience because you were actually boots on the ground and you got to see um the Bad Bunny experience in a different way. You got to see the dancers coming to the ground and everything else, correct?
I did. Got to see him set up the stage. I got to see him leave everything. And one of the most interesting parts about it was that Bad Bunny wanted a stage set up with a lot of bushes, a lot of like cane fields, and so they had 380 people dressed up like bushes who all walked out onto the field and just stood there for the entire halftime show and then ran off the field at the end of it. It was just crazy staging, crazy and fun. And I say everybody at the game that I ever saw was smiling and enjoying it and just loving it. And nobody complained about a thing. Nobody said anything about it. They just enjoyed the experience of the halftime show. And so, I was quite surprised when I got back and found so much negative press about how dare they put somebody on the halftime show that that sang in Spanish. How dare they put, and some people even say somebody that wasn't from America, in the halftime show. How dare they offend us by not being white? It, it was, it was, it was outstanding and a laughable example, both terrible and laughable example of racism and tribal instincts and in-group biases and all of the things that we've been talking about now for many, many weeks here.
It begged us to ask the question, can the American dream truly be achieved by anyone that isn't a white Anglo-Saxon male that speaks English? Because as much as they may want to try to tell a story, Bad Bunny in all instances should be a reflection of the American dream. He is a U.S. citizen because he's born in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. He was a former bag boy. So 10 years ago, he was stuffing groceries in the bags at his local grocery store in Puerto Rico to 10 years later being on the biggest stage in the world as the most streamed artist in the world, right? As we look at that turning point halftime show, if you would have added all of the artists who performed at Turning Point's streaming numbers together, it would still not equal half of Bad Bunny's Bad Month. So
That's true. I saw something the other day that said that he was worth many hundreds of millions of dollars, as being, the most streamed artist on Spotify and several other platforms. And just making a phenomenal amount of money, and I understand why, because his performance was incredible. It was just incredible, absolutely world class. The staging was marvelous. 12 minutes of incredible energy. I don't know how many times they must have rehearsed that, but it was as good a show as you will ever see anytime and anywhere.
And he broke the record, you know, 142 million people tuned in to watch this performance. But this performance showed the the large divide between those who see the American dream and those who actually want others to achieve it. And
Yeah,
it was actually rather scary to listen to people talk about speak English. Like Puerto Rico isn't a Spanish speaking province of the United States, you know, even to listen um to our our president, right, say words that weren't as encouraging as it should have been, right? Because Bad Bunny didn't fit the stereotype,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
And I think it really, is another prime example of the in-group bias that we naturally have. We in the book Curing Racism in our workshops, we talk about the human instinct, the tribal instinct that we already have, always have, that can very easily become in-group bias. It can very easily become tribal conflict. And especially when leaders tell us that it's those people who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, who don't dress like us, or just don't think like us, those are the bad guys. They are the source of all your problems. And it's the blaming and the shaming of people who are perceived to be the others that keeps those leaders in their positions of power. Because if they can make you afraid of those other people, then you will be more likely to follow their orders and follow their will. So this is an exact prime example of people who want to blame others and treat them as the enemies and really encourage people to embrace their own victim energy just for their own purposes, for their own power positions. It's um it's another life lesson, another lesson that we see played out in so many different ways, where people blame and shame members of other groups, thinking that if one person in that other group is a bad person, then they all must be bad people. If one Democrat is a criminal, then they all must be. If one Republican is a criminal, then they all must be. If one Jewish person, one Hindu person, one Palestinian, one Muslim, one Christian, one Catholic, one of those other people is a bad person, then they all must be. And it's just not true.
say that, because it is so unfortunate how we don't get to fall in love with the differences that humanity has because we lean into these common accepted biases. You know, this Bad Bunny situation was just a highlight of how easy it is for common accepted biases to become something that is not only dividing but detrimental to our country, because uh, it wasn't that Turning Point provided an alternative to the Super Bowl. It's that turning point only found the need to provide an alternative to the Super Bowl at this point. We didn't have we didn't have an alternative when it was rock and roll. We didn't have an alternative when it was so many other genres. But because it was a language that we don't want to accept as the most prevalent language in the world, we chose to be and feed into our biases as a country. Now, that doesn't mean individuals, didn't stand firm. That didn't mean groups didn't stand firm. But there were still 6 million people that tuned in to watch that Turning Point halftime show. There were still 6 million people that allowed their commonly accepted biases to sway their better judgment. So,
Amen. Amen to that. Well, I'm looking forward to, the day when we in America and all over the world, grow in wisdom, and we grow in kindness, and we grow in patience, and we grow in our consciousness to be able to celebrate other cultures, celebrate other languages, other styles of dress, other styles of music, as part of this rich, rich tapestry of this human experience that we have, instead of being so frightened and fearful of those people who are different from us. As I like to say, and I try to say at least once, in every one of our podcasts, is that when we learn to see through the superficial differences that divide us, we will discover the common values that unite us. Common values like love for our family, common values like wanting to be as healthy as we can and as happy as we can. Those are common values across, I think, almost every human being there is out there. It's very, very few of us, 1%, 2%, who have no empathy, who have no compassion, who have antisocial personality disorder. But for the vast majority of the rest of us, we share common values. And if we just began every conversation with a reflection on those common values, the love of health and happiness, the love for our family, the wanting our children to have the best opportunities that they can and be as safe as they possibly can, I think this world would be a heck of a lot better place.
I agree. I agree with you 1,000%, right? If we would just allow ourselves to be the love that we would love to receive,
Yeah,
right? That's just so simple.
it is simple. So that's going to be our challenge to everybody who hears this podcast, whether you're live or whether you're listening to a recording of it. Think about the times in which you have not been able to or chose not to see through those superficial differences. When you look at somebody, when you get next to somebody who doesn't look like you, talk the same language as you do, doesn't dress like you, may not even think about you, think about having that conversation with them that establishes that connection that allows you to have a heart-to-heart relationship with them. Talk about the things that you love. Talk about the things that you have in common. Talk about love for family. Talk about wanting to be healthy and happy and safe. Talk about wanting to be free, and appreciating the founding principles of the United States and doing everything that we can, to abide by them and to promote them. Make that connection, make that heartfelt connection, reach out beyond those superficial differences and discover the common values that allow us to embrace each other in the ways that Paz and I embrace each other.
Peaceful way to see life, right? To just be the love, right? Have that conversation. You learn something new, you meet someone new, you can you can experience something new. One of the great things about growing up in New York City in the 90s was, yeah, I dated myself a little here, uh, was that there was so there was you can go into different neighborhoods and get different cultures without ever leaving the city. You can go into Little Italy and feel the Italian culture. You can go to you can go to Harlem. You can go to Chinatown. Like there were these areas which really preserved the culture in which these spaces and places actually stood alone but stood together, right? Because that's what made the city so beautiful. And if we could take that same approach to appreciating just all cultures, right? Because you may not like everything, but there's always something that you will like, right? You may not you may not like the music, but you may like the food. You may
Mhm.
not like the food, but you may like the sound of the language, right? The language just sounds beautiful. You may not like the sound of the language, but you may feel the love in the culture, right? Take the time, you know, to open up your mind and your heart so that you can meet someone new, feel something new, and be a part of the solution.
I love it. I think that's a great way to end our conversation today, encouraging everybody to be part of the solution, and to do what they can to overcome their in-group bias, and reach out to people who are in some way different from them. If you work for a company that you think maybe a diversity education workshop, a curing racism workshop, a conversation with Paz and Paul might be helpful to your team, to help them bond together and have greater teamwork and greater productivity and greater appreciation of the differences that we all have, kindly reach out to us. Go to curingracism.com, enter your information. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you. We would love to take this message of inclusion, this message of appreciation for different cultures, this message of understanding why in-group bias, tribal conflict, tribal instinct exists in the first place, to your company. So reach out to us. We'd love to have that conversation.
And the question that we asked today, does the American dream come in a language, a color, a hue, or is it for everyone? If it is, then go back and enjoy that Super Bowl halftime show if you missed it.
Love it. Always great to talk to you, Paz. Have an awesome week. We'll be back again next week with another edition of the Curing Racism podcast. Until then, go be as loving and